Entire cities erased in hours, temples abandoned, populations gone. Today we're uncovering the lost civilizations that vanished without a trace, and the terrifying reasons why. Indus Valley Civilization. At its peak, the Indus Valley was one of the largest civilizations on Earth, and most people today have never even heard of it. Flourishing around 26,000 BCE in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, the Indus Valley had advanced urban planning that rivaled ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had straight roads, underground drainage, public baths, and standardized brickwork. Over 5 million people lived across hundreds of settlements. But here's the twist. There are no grand kings, no war monuments, and no deciphered writing. We still don't know what they call themselves. And then everything changed in just one night. Around 1900 BCE, the cities began to empty. Trade routes collapsed. The carefully laid bricks were abandoned. Within a few generations, the civilization had gone. Theories range from a massive drought caused by shifting monsoon patterns to a sudden river migration that destroyed agriculture. Some even point to a slow invasion by Indo-Aryan tribes. Whatever the cause, the Indus Valley left behind no final stand, no farewell, just crumbling cities and an eerie, engineered silence. But if disappearing slowly was haunting, wait until you see a civilization frozen in the exact moment disaster struck. Pompeii and Herculaneum. In 79 CE, the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were thriving. Pompeii, a bustling trade hub with 11,000 residents. Herculaneum, smaller but wealthier, lined with lavish villas and seaside views. Life moved at a Roman pace. Markets, baths, political debates, and then the sky turned black. Mount Vesuvius erupted without warning. First came the ash, raining down for hours. Then came pyroclastic flows, surges of superheated gas and rock traveling over 100 miles per hour. People didn't have time to flee. They didn't have time to think. Everything stopped mid-sentence. Most people don't know this part. Pompeii wasn't lost because it was forgotten. It was buried under 20 feet of ash and debris, so quickly, so thoroughly, that entire buildings, frescoes, even meals were preserved. It stayed that way for over 1,500 years. And Herculaneum, even more intact. Scrolls in libraries, wooden doors still unhinged as if time simply paused. But the terror was real. Thousands were overtaken, their lives frozen in that moment, forever preserved in the ash. But across the ocean, another great civilization would disappear in an entirely different way. Not in fire and ash, but under vines, roots, and jungle silence. The Maya collapse. For centuries, the Maya built one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas. From 250 to 900 CE, they filled Central America with monumental cities. Tikal, Copan, Palenque, rising pyramids above thick jungles, and complex calendars that tracked the stars with stunning precision. At their height, millions of people thrived under a network of city-states bound by trade, religion, and war. And then, the jungle began to take them back. Around the late 8th and 9th centuries, the great Maya cities started emptying out. Construction stopped. Populations declined. Within a few generations, many of their most iconic cities were abandoned, left to crumble beneath vines and earth. Most people don't know this part. There was no single collapse. It came in waves. Severe droughts weakened agriculture. Endless warfare drained resources. Overpopulation strained food supplies. And when political systems faltered, the foundation of Maya life slipped away. By the time Europeans arrived, the grand capitals of the classic Maya period had already been overtaken by jungle. For centuries, their temples and palaces remained hidden, like ghosts under the trees. The Maya didn't vanish in a day like Pompeii. Their decline stretched over decades, but from the outside, it still looked like entire cities disappeared overnight. And the next disappearance? It wasn't caused by drought or jungle. It happened on an island in the Pacific, where towering stone giants stood guard over a people who suddenly were gone. Easter Island. Far out in the Pacific Ocean lies Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, a remote speck of land, made famous by its colossal stone statues, the moai, carved from volcanic rock and weighing up to 80 tons each. These statues were raised by a thriving Polynesian culture that settled the islands around 1200 CE. At their height, the Rapa Nui people numbered in the tens of thousands. But then something changed. Forests were cleared to transport and raise the massive statues. Over time, the island's resources dwindled. Soil eroded, birds and other wildlife vanished. And as the population grew, competition for survival intensified. Most people don't know this part. The downfall of Rapa Nui wasn't just ecological. Evidence suggests fierce competition broke out between clans. Some statues were deliberately toppled. By the 18th century, when the Europeans arrived, the population had collapsed to just a few thousand. Within decades, disease and slave raids reduced it further. The Great Moai still stand, but the society that built them had all but disappeared. What remains is a haunting lesson in how human ambition can push an environment past the point of recovery. But while Rapa Nui fell to resource exhaustion, another great society collapsed under the weight of invasion. Its libraries burned, its temples looted, and its empire reduced to ruins. The Aztec Empire. In the early 1500s, the Aztec Empire was the most powerful force in Mesoamerica. At its center stood Tenochtitlan, a city built on lakes, with canals and causeways, floating gardens, and towering temples. Spanish conquistadors who first saw it compared it to Venice, except it was bigger. Nearly 200,000 people lived there, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. And then in the span of just 2 years, it was gone. When Hernan Cortés arrived in 1519, he found not only a wealthy empire, but also deep divisions among the Aztecs' subject peoples. With steel, horses, and gunpowder, the Spanish had advantages. But their greatest weapon wasn't military, it was disease. Smallpox spread rapidly through Tenochtitlan, claiming countless lives, including leaders and warriors who might have led the resistance. Most people don't know this part. The final siege of Tenochtitlan in 1521 left the city in ruins. Aqueducts were cut, famine spread, and after months of brutal fighting, the capital was reduced to rubble. Survivors were enslaved or scattered. A civilization that had dominated the region for a century vanished almost overnight. The Aztec story is one of conquest, an empire destroyed by a combination of foreign invasion, internal fractures, and an invisible enemy they couldn't understand. But while the Aztecs fell to steel and disease, another civilization across the ocean faced its downfall from fire and shifting earth, leaving behind colossal temples buried under centuries of dust. The Akkadian Empire. Long before Rome, long before Greece, there was Akkad. Around 2300 BCE, King Sargon of Akkad forged the world's first true empire, uniting Mesopotamia under one rule. His dynasty controlled vast lands from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. For more than a century, Akkad thrived. Its armies feared, its cities wealthy, its kings celebrated as semi-divine. And then the empire unraveled. Within just a few decades, records speak of abandoned cities and famine. Archaeologists uncovered signs of a massive drought, the so-called 4.2 kiloyear event. Crops failed, rivers shrank. Without food, populations scattered. The empire's tightly linked cities, once a source of strength, became a fatal weakness. But there's something you probably haven't heard. Akkad's fall was so sudden that later Mesopotamian texts turned it into legend. They spoke of a curse from the gods, of winds so hot they withered the land, of fields that yielded nothing. Whether myth or memory, it captured the trauma of a civilization that simply stopped existing. By 2100 BCE, Akkad had collapsed into smaller kingdoms. Its language faded, its cities were swallowed by shifting sands. For centuries, even its capital was lost to history. And if drought could end the First Empire, imagine what would happen when a thriving Bronze Age world collapsed all at once. Trade routes severed, palaces burned, kingdoms gone. The Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BCE, the eastern Mediterranean was buzzing with power. Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenaean Greece, and countless city-states thrived on bronze, metal that fueled weapons, trade, and empires. For centuries, this network connected kings and merchants from Anatolia to Mesopotamia. And then, it all fell apart. In just a few decades, palaces were abandoned, cities burned, entire writing systems disappeared. Trade collapsed so completely that even the knowledge of how to make certain goods was forgotten. Archaeologists call it the Bronze Age collapse, and it's one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. So what happened? Drought struck harvests, earthquakes shattered cities, invasions by mysterious sea peoples overwhelmed coastal kingdoms. And once one link in the chain broke, the entire interconnected system fell with it. Most people don't know this part. Literacy itself nearly vanished. The Greeks lost their writing system for 400 years. Complex diplomacy and trade were replaced by centuries of isolation and survival. It was as if civilization itself had pressed pause. By 1100 BCE, the Hittite Empire was gone. Mycenaean palaces lay in ruins. Only Egypt managed to hang on, and even it was permanently weakened. The Bronze Age collapsed and proved that when the world becomes too connected, one shock can trigger a cascade that erases everything. But centuries later, another advanced culture would vanish just as strangely. Its pyramids lost to the sands, its cities hidden until explorers stumbled across them. The Kingdom of Kush. South of Egypt, along the Nile, rose a powerful rival, the Kingdom of Kush. Centered in Nubia, it controlled trade routes rich in gold, ivory, and exotic goods. For centuries, Kushite pharaohs even ruled over Egypt itself, building pyramids of their own at places like Meroe and Napata. At its height, around 300 BCE, Meroe was a metropolis of iron smelting, bustling markets, and monumental temples. The Kushites developed their own writing system, the Meroitic script, and left behind hundreds of pyramids that still stand today. And then, silence. By the 4th century CE, the Kingdom of Kush had all but disappeared. Meroe's forges went cold, its pyramids abandoned to sand, trade routes shifted as the Roman Empire rose, and rival powers gained dominance. Some historians point to overexploitation of resources, the deforestation and soil erosion caused by relentless iron production, as a slow but devastating drain on the kingdom's strength. What history books don't usually tell you is Kush's language remains undeciphered. We can read its monuments but not its words. So even though the pyramids remain, the voices of the people who built them are lost forever. The Kingdom of Kush shows how even great powers can fade quietly, swallowed by desert winds, until only ruins remain. But not every disappearance was quiet. Some were violent, sudden, entire cities abandoned, as if people walked out mid-sentence and never returned. Çatalhöyük. Long before the pyramids, long before Stonehenge, there was Çatalhöyük. Founded around 7500 BCE in what is now Turkey, it was one of the world's first major urban centers. At its peak, thousands lived in tightly packed mud brick houses, so close together that people entered through holes in the roof. For over a millennium, life thrived here. Residents farmed, herded animals, painted walls with vivid murals, and buried their dead beneath their own homes. There was no grand palaces, no central temples, just a dense, buzzing city that somehow worked without kings or armies. And then after nearly 1,500 years, it was gone. The hidden detail most people miss. There's no sign of invasion, no evidence of fire or natural disaster. The city seems to have slowly emptied out. Some archaeologists point to changing climate, others to disease or even social pressures in a city that had grown too crowded to sustain itself. Whatever the reason, by 5700 BCE, Çatalhöyük was abandoned. What makes it so haunting is the suddenness. Families appear to have left behind tools, shrines, even food supplies, as if daily life simply stopped. For centuries, the city was forgotten beneath layers of earth until rediscovered in the 20th century. Today it remains standing as a reminder that even the earliest experiments in urban life were fragile. But while Çatalhöyük slipped away in silence, another ancient city was swallowed all at once. Its temples buried beneath sandstorms, its people scattered so completely that their culture nearly vanished from history. The lost city of Ubar. In the deserts of Oman, legend spoke of a wealthy city called Ubar. Ancient texts described it as the City of Towers, a trading hub on the frankincense route that connected Arabia to the Mediterranean. Poets called it the Atlantis of the Sands. For centuries, many believed it was only a myth. And then in the 1990s, satellite imaging revealed something remarkable. Old caravan routes converging on a buried site. Excavations uncovered collapsed structures, pottery, and evidence of once bustling trade. It seemed Ubar was real after all. So what happened? Here's the part buried in the archives. Geologists believe the city was built above an underground limestone cavern. Over time, the ground weakened until it collapsed, swallowing part of the settlement into a massive sinkhole. Add shifting trade routes and encroaching desert sands, and Ubar was abandoned. Its towers left to crumble in isolation. The story of Ubar blends history and legend, showing how even a city enriched by global trade could vanish almost instantly, preserved only in myth until modern science rediscovered it. So across deserts, jungles, and oceans, we've seen civilizations rise to brilliance, only to vanish almost overnight. Some were crushed by disaster, others by invasion, and many by forces they couldn't even recognize until it was too late. And yet every time the pattern feels familiar, ambition, expansion, fragility, collapse. Which leaves us with one haunting question. If even the mightiest societies could vanish so quickly, how different would our world be today if just one of them had survived? If you want to uncover more of history's lost chapters, subscribe and drop a comment with the civilization you think we should explore next.